Do you remember those foods from the 1980s? The ones so normal back then but shocking to know they're illegal now? These foods filled lunchboxes, kitchen tables, and grocery carts, shaping everyday childhood diets without a second thought. What does it say about us that what was once comfort is now forbidden? Kinder Surprise eggs were one of the most talked about treats of the 1980s. Kids across Europe unwrapped the hollow chocolate eggs to find tiny toys sealed inside. It was the perfect mix of candy and surprise, like two gifts in one. Playgrounds buzzed with kids showing off their miniature toys, trading them like rare treasures. Some children collected the figures in shoeboxes, building whole imaginary worlds from them. The chocolate itself almost felt secondary because the thrill of discovery was the real prize. But in the United States, the very thing that made them exciting, those plastic capsules hidden inside, got them banned. Regulators saw them as a choking hazard, claiming children could bite into the toy without realizing it. Parents remembered begging their kids to slow down and eat carefully. But the thrill was always stronger than the warning. Many American children only heard about them from friends who traveled overseas, which made the candy feel almost mythical. Today, you can find safer versions, like Kinder Joy, but they do not carry the same mystique. For those who grew up when the originals were freely available, Kinder Surprise eggs represent a kind of childhood wonder that is now off-limits. They were chocolate, playtime, and a little bit of danger all wrapped up in shiny foil. Original Olean or Olistra chips were one of the boldest food experiments of the 1980s and 1990s. They promised the impossible, potato chips that tasted fried and delicious but carried none of the fat. Snackers piled bags of these chips into grocery carts, excited by the promise of guilt-free indulgence. Commercials sold them as a miracle of science, with actors crunching happily while the words "fat-free" flashed across the screen. Many dieters swore they had finally found a snack that let them cheat without consequences. But within months, whispers of unpleasant side effects started spreading, and the excitement turned to dread. But behind the glossy packaging was a chemical formula that the body could not fully absorb. For many people, that led to harsh stomach cramps, digestive issues, and some very embarrassing side effects that became the stuff of jokes. Lawsuits piled up, and consumer trust quickly vanished. At first, it felt like a miracle snack, but soon the product became a symbol of how far food companies would go to sell an idea. Today, the chips are a relic of what happens when chemistry meets cravings, and consumers pay the price. For those who remember trying them, the taste of Olistra chips is forever linked with regret. Candy cigarettes were one of the most controversial sweets of the 1980s. Shaped like thin white sticks, sometimes tipped with red dye to mimic a glowing ember, they were marketed directly to children. Kids held them between their fingers, puffed imaginary smoke, and felt like grown-ups copying their parents. Some kids strutted around playgrounds pretending to puff, blowing out fake smoke made from powdered sugar. Others tucked the little boxes into their pockets like they were carrying the real thing. For many, it was not about the taste at all. It was about the performance of feeling older. Some even came in boxes that looked identical to real cigarette brands. Parents may have laughed at the sight, but health advocates were horrified. They argued that candy cigarettes made smoking seem glamorous and fun, planting seeds for habits that could last a lifetime. Eventually, many countries banned them outright, while others allowed generic versions without branding. Today, the thought of children pretending to smoke candy feels unsettling, almost absurd. Yet back then, candy cigarettes were a regular sight at corner stores tucked right alongside gum and lollipops. For many, they are a strange reminder of how different attitudes toward health and marketing once were. Fruit roll-ups with artificial red dye. Number 2 became one of the biggest examples of food science gone wrong. Kids loved peeling the sticky sheets of sugary fruit leather and pressing them onto their tongues to leave behind silly stains. Parents tossed them into lunchboxes, thinking they were a fun, fruity snack. Some kids even wore them like fake tongues, sticking them to their mouths and making faces at friends. Others saved up allowance money to buy boxes just to collect every flavor, even if they all tasted nearly the same. The sticky texture and neon colors made them feel less like food and more like edible toys. But beneath the bright colors was an artificial dye that raised serious health concerns. Studies linked red dye number 2 to cancer in lab animals, and by the mid-1980s, the additive was banned in the United States. Suddenly, something kids saw as harmless fun turned into a cautionary tale. Later versions of fruit roll-ups used other dyes, but many parents remained wary of the bright reds and blues. For children of the 1980s, the memory of those original neon snacks remained strong. They were sticky, sweet, and dangerous in a way that no one fully understood at the time. Surge soda in its early formula was one of the most hyped drinks of the 1980s and early 1990s. Marketed as an extreme high-energy soda, it promised kids the kind of buzz usually reserved for strong coffee. Bright green cans, commercials with explosions, and slogans about living life to the max made it irresistible. Teenagers stocked up on it for sleepovers, daring each other to drink multiple cans in one night. Parents sometimes found empty cases hidden in basements, proof of late-night sugar and caffeine binges. It became less of a soda and more of a dare, a liquid challenge for anyone bold enough to chug it. But the caffeine levels were sky-high, and critics accused the brand of targeting children with a drink more like an energy supplement than a soft drink. Teachers noticed kids bouncing off classroom walls, and health groups demanded action. Lawsuits and parental protests soon followed. The soda disappeared from shelves, only to return decades later in a toned-down formula. For those who remember the original, it was a wild symbol of the 1980s marketing machine, loud, risky, and unforgettable. Orbit's soda was one of the strangest drinks to ever hit store shelves in the 1980s and 1990s. Packaged in futuristic bottles, the liquid inside looked like a lava lamp. Brightly colored spheres floated in suspension, bobbing and drifting every time you tilted the bottle. Kids passed bottles around just to marvel at how the floating beads never sank. Some described it as drinking science fiction, while others joked it felt like swallowing fish eggs. The spectacle was half the fun, even if the taste left much to be desired. Kids stared in fascination, unsure if it was candy or drink. The texture was strange, with the balls sliding across your tongue in a way that many found unsettling. Parents were skeptical of the gelling agents used to keep the spheres afloat, and regulators soon raised questions about their safety. Sales collapsed as quickly as the craze began. Today, Orbit soda lives on only in memory and photos of its bizarre bottles. It is shocking to think that something so odd was once marketed as the future of refreshment. Bubblegum cigars were a classic novelty candy in the 1980s. Wrapped in paper and designed to look like real cigars, they were sold in bright colors with flavors like grape, strawberry, or watermelon. Kids loved chewing them and blowing bubbles, but the message they sent was troubling. Birthday parties often included packs of these, handed out like prizes to kids who thought they looked grown up. Stores displayed them right alongside real cigars, making the illusion even stronger. For many children, chewing one felt like copying their fathers or uncles without any of the smoke. They mimicked adult behavior in the same way candy cigarettes did, making smoking and chewing tobacco look playful. Some even came in packaging nearly identical to real cigar brands, blurring the line even further. Over time, health advocates pushed back, and sales were restricted or banned in many places. Today, the idea of handing children a candy shaped like a cigar feels shocking. But in the 1980s, they were common party favors and convenience store finds, celebrated more for their novelty than their consequences. Ecto Cooler, the bright green high-C drink, became famous in the 1980s thanks to its tie-in with the Ghostbusters franchise. Commercials showed Slimer, the gooey green ghost, happily slurping the neon liquid. Kids loved the sour-sweet citrus flavor, but what made the drink iconic was its unnatural glow. Lunch tables became battlefields as kids traded juice boxes of Ecto Cooler like gold. The drink's packaging alone, with Slimer grinning, made it one of the coolest things you could pull out at recess. It was not just a beverage, it was a badge of being part of the Ghostbusters craze. The color came from artificial dyes that were later banned for health reasons. At the time, no one thought twice about pouring glasses of fluorescent green juice at birthday parties. Parents even stocked it for school lunches, seeing it as just another fun fruit drink. But when the dyes were removed, the magic seemed to vanish. For many, Ecto Cooler is more than a discontinued drink. It is a time capsule of 1980s pop culture, both exciting and slightly unsettling in hindsight. Shark Bites fruit. Snacks in their original formula were wildly popular with kids. Each pack contained colorful gummy shapes shaped like sharks, and every child hoped to score the rare, great white gummy hidden inside. The thrill of opening the bag was as exciting as eating the candy itself. Playgrounds buzzed with trades, with some kids hoarding the rare white shark gummies as if they were treasure. The excitement of tearing into a fresh pack was almost like opening a pack of baseball cards. You never knew what you would get. It was this gamble that made Shark Bites feel like more than just candy. But those gummies were loaded with artificial dyes, corn syrup, and additives that later faced heavy restrictions. Parents eventually questioned why kids needed neon blue gummies to feel happy. When reformulated, the fun shapes remained, but the intense colors and flavors faded. For children of the 1980s, Shark Bites were a highlight of lunchboxes and after-school snacks. They symbolized a time when fun came first, even if health risks lurked in the fine print. Blue Pepsi and Crystal Pepsi felt like pure magic when they appeared in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Blue Pepsi offered an electric, unnatural color that looked as wild as it tasted, while Crystal Pepsi promised a futuristic, clear cola. Both drinks relied on food coloring and chemical stabilizers that later faced bans or restrictions. Commercials played up the shock factor, with kids gasping as soda poured out in strange colors. Some swore the clear cola tasted cleaner, even though blind taste tests showed it was the same. For kids, though, it was less about flavor and more about holding something that looked brand new. At the time, kids begged for them in grocery aisles, dazzled by the novelty. The drinks tasted almost identical to regular cola, but the look made all the difference. Parents rolled their eyes while children thought they were sipping the future. When the additives were pulled, the sodas quickly disappeared. Today, they are remembered as bold experiments in marketing and chemistry, drinks that looked cooler than they actually were. Pepsi AM was one of the boldest food experiments of the 1980s. The idea was simple. People loved soda, people loved caffeine. So why not market cola as a breakfast drink? Commercials pitched Pepsi AM as a way to skip coffee and start the morning with a bubbly jolt. The formula contained significantly more caffeine than regular Pepsi, and teenagers and young adults loved the excuse to drink soda at breakfast without guilt. Some kids bragged about bringing a can to school, insisting it gave them more energy than coffee. Ads leaned into this rebellious image, showing Pepsi AM as the choice for people too cool for tradition. The drink quickly became more of a cultural statement than just another soda. Parents and doctors, however, were less amused. The combination of sugar and sky-high caffeine made critics worry about heart palpitations, jitters, and sleepless nights. Sales were steady at first, but public backlash was fierce. By the late 1980s, Pepsi AM was quietly discontinued, surviving only as a strange footnote in the history of soda. Today, people shake their heads at the thought of drinking cola with cereal. But for a brief moment, Pepsi convinced Americans that soda could replace a hot cup of coffee, and some still remember that bubbly kick fondly. Squeeze-It drinks with neon coloring were a lunchbox highlight for kids in the 1980s. These plastic bottles twisted open to release sugary liquid in fluorescent shades of green, blue, and red. Children loved the novelty of squeezing the bottle until the last drop, while parents saw them as harmless fun. Kids compared bottle colors on the playground, trading them like they were currency. Birthday parties often had coolers full of Squeeze-Its glowing like liquid candy under the sun. They became such a fad that even the empties were saved, lined up on desks or windowsills as proof of who had the most. But hidden inside those bright colors were artificial dyes that raised health concerns. Regulators eventually restricted or banned some of the key ingredients, especially the ones linked to hyperactivity and possible cancer risks. The reformulated versions never carried the same excitement because the colors no longer glowed with that cartoonish intensity. For kids of the time, ripping open a Squeeze-It was like holding liquid candy. Today, the thought of letting children gulp down neon chemicals feels shocking, but back then it was just another afternoon treat. The bottles themselves became playground trophies, a symbol of who had the coolest drink at lunch. Fruit-flavored wax bottles, better known as nickel nips, were strange even in their heyday. Kids would bite off the top of the soft wax bottle, drink the sweet liquid inside, and then chew the wax like gum. The flavors were fruity, but the real thrill was in the strange experience of biting and chewing something not meant to be swallowed. Children dared each other to eat the wax, even though adults warned against it. The bottles showed up at carnivals, dime stores, and candy counters, often sold by the handful. Part of the appeal was their cheapness. You could grab a pack for pocket change and feel like you had something exotic. Parents often worried about kids accidentally eating the wax, and regulators raised concerns about safety. By the 1990s, the product was heavily restricted and harder to find, though it still lingers in some novelty shops. Looking back, it feels almost shocking that children were once encouraged to gnaw on tiny bottles of wax as if that were normal. For kids, it was a weird little treat that felt fun precisely because it was unusual. For adults now, it is a reminder of how much food safety rules have changed. Hostess Chocodiles were like a dream come true for chocolate lovers in the 1980s. They were essentially Twinkies dipped in a thick layer of chocolate, turning the classic golden sponge cake into something richer and more indulgent. Kids begged for them in grocery aisles, and for a while they were as common as ding-dongs or ho-hos. Lunch trades for Chocodiles were legendary. Kids would give up nearly anything for one. Their packaging stood out with bold lettering, making them feel larger than life in vending machines. Some fans even froze them, swearing the texture was better that way. But as ingredient regulations tightened, especially around preservatives and certain trans fats, the recipe became harder to justify. Production slowed, and eventually, Chocodiles disappeared altogether in many regions. Fans were devastated, treating the loss like the end of a childhood tradition. Though a cleaner version returned decades later, people swear it never tasted quite the same. The original had a density, a sweetness, and a chemical tang that nostalgia alone cannot recreate. For those who grew up with them, Chocodiles are more than a snack. They are a bite of 1980s history. Planters cheese balls were once a staple of every snack cabinet. The bright orange spheres came in tall canisters, promising cheesy, salty satisfaction in every bite. Their original formula, however, was loaded with trans fats, artificial flavorings, and colorings now restricted or banned. The smell of opening a fresh can filled the room instantly, and kids dove in before the lid even hit the counter. Hands turned neon orange within minutes, a badge of honor that proved you had eaten more than your share. Entire families demolished canisters in one sitting, never thinking twice about the ingredients. Kids licked the neon dust off their fingers while watching cartoons, never thinking about the chemicals behind the flavor. When the product disappeared in the 2000s, fans begged for its return. A cleaner version finally came back, but die-hard fans insist the flavor is different. The original had a sharpness and melt-in-your-mouth quality that reformulations just cannot match. Cheese balls were junk food at its peak, bright, addictive, and proudly artificial. Today, we look back with both fondness and disbelief at how casually we ate them by the handful. Hubba Bubba Soda is one of those products that seems unbelievable in hindsight. Imagine a soft drink that tasted exactly like bubble gum, right down to the sugary aftertaste. In the 1980s, it was marketed as fun and quirky, and kids begged for it at gas stations and corner stores. The commercials showed kids grinning with pink foam on their lips, as if bubblegum soda was the coolest invention ever. Many children saved the cans as collectibles, treating them like trophies from a strange candy experiment. Parents, however, often shook their heads, wondering how anyone thought gum flavor belonged in a drink. The drink was bright pink, sweet beyond reason, and left a sticky flavor in your mouth long after the can was empty. Parents tolerated it as a novelty, but regulators eventually banned some of the additives and dyes used to achieve its color and flavor. Sales faded, and the soda disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. For many kids, however, trying Hubba Bubba soda was a badge of honor, a moment when candy and soda collided in one ridiculous package. Today, it is remembered as a symbol of how far companies went to cash in on fads. Peanut butter cheese cracker packs were one of the most dependable lunchbox staples of the 1980s. Wrapped in plastic, each pack contained 6 bright orange crackers, sandwiching a layer of peanut butter. They were salty, filling, and affordable, making them a favorite for parents and kids alike. The little packs were traded in cafeterias, often swapped for cookies or fruit snacks depending on what kids valued that day. Some children carefully ate each cracker separately, while others mashed them together into one giant peanut butter bite. Everyone had their own ritual, and that made the snack feel personal. But the original recipes relied heavily on trans fats, which gave the crackers their flaky texture and long shelf life. Once trans fats were banned, these snack packs were reformulated, and many fans noticed the difference. The old versions had a richness that the new ones lack. For children of the 1980s, tearing into one of those packs felt like opening a guaranteed treat. Today, we understand why those fats had to go, but nostalgia still insists that the old crackers tasted better. Peanut butter Twinkies may sound like a gimmick, but they were a real product that hit shelves during the snack boom of the 1980s. Hostess experimented with different fillings, and peanut butter was one of the more daring flavors. For kids who loved Reese's, it felt like a dream come true. Creamy peanut butter stuffed inside that spongy golden cake. Some kids claimed they were even better frozen, sneaking them from the freezer late at night for a secret snack. Others brought them to school as a bragging point, showing off that they had the rare peanut butter version instead of the plain cream. It became a small badge of status in the lunchroom, but as allergy warnings became stricter and schools cracked down on peanut products, the Twinkies disappeared. Parents grew wary of sending peanut-laced snacks in lunchboxes, and the product faded into obscurity. Fans still remember the odd combination with fondness, claiming it was richer and more satisfying than the vanilla cream original. Today, peanut butter Twinkies are a reminder of a time when food companies chased novelty without worrying about the risks. Trix yogurt, in its original formula, was one of the brightest, most eye-catching items in the dairy aisle. Each container paired neon pink with neon blue or green swirls, promising kids a spoonful of fun. The taste was extremely sweet, closer to candy than yogurt, and the colors often left tongues streaked for hours. Children compared whose tongue was the brightest, laughing as they stuck them out at recess. Parents sometimes winced at the fluorescent colors but gave in because it was marketed as yogurt, which sounded healthier than it really was. For many kids, it was less about nutrition and more about showing off that wild swirl of colors. Parents tossed them into lunchboxes, thinking they were a harmless snack. But the dyes and additives used to achieve those colors were eventually banned or restricted, leading to reformulated versions that looked much duller. The fun faded, and eventually Trix yogurt was discontinued altogether in many regions. For children of the 1980s, the original remains a symbol of wild, carefree eating, bright, sweet, and totally over the top. Mountain Dew. Pitch Black in its first formula was a cult favorite. Launched with a dark purple hue and bold grape flavor, it stood out immediately from other sodas on the shelf. Kids loved the color, which looked almost alien under the fluorescent lights of convenience stores. Fans held competitions to see who could chug the most cans, bragging about their grape-fueled energy. The soda became a conversation starter, with some kids loving the bold taste while others swore it was too strange to enjoy. Either way, it gave Mountain Dew a reputation for being fearless with flavors. But that same hue came from coloring agents later banned for safety reasons. Once regulators cracked down, the formula was quietly changed, and the soda lost some of its original intensity. Fans still mourn the loss, insisting the first version tasted better and felt more dangerous. For many, cracking open a can of Pitch Black was like joining a secret club of soda lovers who thrived on extremes. Today, it is remembered as one of the boldest and weirdest sodas of its time. Fruit Stripe gum with dye coating was one of the most colorful pieces of candy you could ever unwrap in the 1980s. Each stick came wrapped in zebra-themed paper with wild red, yellow, green, and blue stripes painted right onto the gum itself. It looked more like an art project than a snack. For kids, the fun was immediate. You could not help but smile when you pulled a stick from the pack and saw those rainbow colors waiting to hit your tongue. The flavor was explosive too, a sweet burst of fruit that seemed stronger than any other gum. Of course, the catch was that the flavor faded within minutes, leaving you chewing on bland rubber. Kids did not care. It was about that first rush of taste and the thrill of showing off the stripes before the gum went pale. What we did not know was that those bold colors came from artificial dyes later flagged for safety issues. Some were linked to hyperactivity in children, others to possible long-term health concerns. Regulators eventually restricted or banned certain coloring agents, and the gum lost its most vibrant hues. Even so, Fruit Stripe gum lives on in memory, tied to childhood moments of tearing open a pack at school, offering sticks to friends, and sticking the free temporary tattoos onto your arm. It was candy that gave you flavor, color, and fun all in one. Today, it is remembered as both exciting and a little dangerous, a sugary rainbow that burned bright but faded fast. Old-school Lunchables with full trans fats were the ultimate lunchbox prize in the late 1980s and 1990s. When they first hit grocery stores, they felt revolutionary. Pre-packaged trays of crackers, meats, and cheese that looked neat, tidy, and perfectly portioned. Kids loved the independence of building their own mini sandwiches, stacking them tall, or eating the cheese first. Parents liked the convenience of grabbing a box off the shelf and tossing it into a lunch bag. But behind the fun was a recipe built on hydrogenated oils, artificial preservatives, and loads of salt. Those trans fats kept the crackers crisp and the cheese shelf-stable for months, but they also came with health risks that were not widely discussed at the time. For kids, none of that mattered. Opening a Lunchable meant you had something cooler than a peanut butter sandwich, and it often made you the envy of the cafeteria table. The trays even expanded into pizza and taco versions, giving children food that felt like toys. Over time, however, the health consequences of trans fats became impossible to ignore. By the early 2000s, regulators cracked down, forcing food companies to phase them out. The Lunchables that remain today are cleaner, lighter, and in many ways healthier, but fans argue they never taste quite the same. The old versions carried a richness and texture that reformulated recipes cannot fully capture. For people who grew up in the 1980s, peeling back that plastic lid is a memory loaded with both joy and junk food chemistry. Crispy M&Ms in their original formula were one of the boldest candy experiments of the 1980s. They took the classic chocolate shell and stuffed it with a puffed rice center, giving every bite a crunch that stood out from the usual smooth M&M experience. Kids loved shaking the bags and hearing the clatter, then tasting that mix of sweetness and texture. The colorful candy shells were as bright as ever, but the formula behind them relied on artificial dyes and preservatives that have since been phased out. Back then, parents rarely questioned the chemistry of candy. They saw a treat that kept children happy and quiet for a few minutes, and that was enough. But food safety advocates raised concerns, especially about dyes tied to hyperactivity and allergies. As regulations tightened, the original formula disappeared, only to be replaced years later with safer coloring and cleaner preservatives. The nostalgia, though, is for those early batches, the ones kids smuggled into movie theaters or shared in the back of classrooms, hoping teachers would not notice. Crispy M&Ms have returned in various forms, but fans of the originals swear the flavor and crunch were different. Maybe it was the thrill of eating something that felt new. Maybe it was the boldness of the original recipe. Or maybe it was simply childhood making everything taste brighter. Whatever the reason, those early M&Ms remain a snapshot of a time when candy was both carefree and a little reckless. Shasta soda flavors like Tiki Punch were staples of neighborhood cookouts and corner store runs in the 1980s. The brand was known for bold flavors, bright cans, and prices that made it easier for parents to say yes. Tiki Punch was the standout, a fruity red soda that tasted like a mix of pineapple, cherry, and sugar all cranked up to 11. It poured neon into cups and fizzed with a sweetness that hit instantly. Kids loved it because it was cheap, plentiful, and seemed more exciting than the usual colas. Parents stocked it by the case for summer barbecues, letting children run wild with 2 or 3 cans at a time. But the formulas behind those sodas often relied on artificial sweeteners and dyes that regulators later flagged. Some sweeteners were linked to health concerns, while certain dyes were banned outright. As those restrictions took hold, many of Shasta's most outrageous flavors faded from shelves. The brand still exists, but the lineup is far smaller and tamer than it once was. For those who grew up with Tiki Punch, every sip was a sugar-soaked rush of summer freedom. Today, the thought of handing kids a neon red soda packed with chemicals feels unthinkable, but at the time, it was just part of childhood. Shasta's boldest flavors are now legends, remembered as both delicious and dangerously over the top. Artificially colored ketchup in green and purple bottles is one of the strangest food fads of the late 1980s and 1990s. Heinz, the king of ketchup, decided to make mealtime more exciting by turning the condiment into something playful and weird. Suddenly, kids could squirt bright green ketchup onto fries or purple ketchup onto burgers, and parents were told it would make picky eaters more interested in food. For a while it worked. Children giggled as they squeezed neon-colored globs onto their plates, and commercials showed smiling families treating ketchup like a toy. But behind the fun were artificial dyes later banned or heavily restricted. Critics argued that ketchup did not need to look like slime to get kids to eat it, and sales soon dropped. Parents realized the novelty wore off quickly, and most kids eventually just wanted the familiar red version back. Within a few years, the colored ketchup bottles disappeared from shelves, leaving behind puzzled memories of why they ever existed. Today, it is remembered as both hilarious and shocking, a time when food companies believed kids wanted their condiments to match cartoons. For those who lived through it, green and purple ketchup are proof that the 1980s and 1990s had no limit on how far marketing would go to grab attention. It was weird, wild, and ultimately short-lived. Fireworks for kids were not just available, they were encouraged. You walked into a gas station, handed over a few dollars, and left with a brown paper bag filled with firecrackers, bottle rockets, and Roman candles. No ID check, no warning label. You lit them with matches, your fingers trembling with excitement. Sometimes you held them too long, sometimes they fizzled out, other times they exploded in your hand. But that was part of the thrill. Neighborhoods erupted with smoke and booms. Adults watched from lawn chairs. Kids ran barefoot across driveways, shrieking with glee and barely avoiding burns. There were no goggles, no supervision, and almost no laws to stop it. Today, most states restrict firework sales to adults. Certain types are banned entirely, and child safety campaigns have all but erased the image of kids with sparklers and pocket lighters. But in the 1980s, fireworks were a childhood staple, dangerous, loud, and unforgettable. The risk was part of the fun, just like cracking open a cold beer on a public beach once felt like a harmless way to enjoy the sunshine before open container laws shut that down too. VHS rental adventures were more than just picking a movie. They were the night's main event. You walked into the store greeted by rows of clamshell cases, each one shouting for your attention with over-the-top artwork and dramatic taglines. New releases lined the front wall, but they were often already rented, marked by empty plastic holders and your own growing disappointment. So you wandered. Comedy? Horror? Something animated for your little brother? You judged movies by their cover. You flipped tapes to read the backs, squinted at blurry screenshots, and made last-minute switches at checkout. There was pressure. Choose wisely. You had this movie for 2 nights, maybe 3. Forget to rewind? Expect a fee. Some stores even had a "Be Kind Rewind" sign that became a national motto. You got home, made popcorn, and watched together as a family. The sound of the tape sliding into the VCR meant it was officially movie night. VHS rentals turned average evenings into little adventures. They made choosing a movie feel like a quest. And even though we stream everything now, nothing beats the charm of browsing those old shelves and hoping your top pick had not been snatched first. Kids riding in the back of pickup trucks was the Saturday thrill ride poor families never paid for. Forget theme parks or roller coasters. The real excitement came from climbing into the truck bed, gripping the sides, and feeling the wind blast your face as Dad barreled down the road. Nobody wore helmets, nobody thought about safety, and parents waved from the cab like it was the most normal thing in the world. Some kids stood up and pretended to surf while the truck sped down dirt roads. Others sprawled flat, faces pressed to the metal, trying to hang on as the bumps rattled them like dice in a cup. Every sharp turn turned into a competition. Who could stay standing and who went flying into a pile of siblings? Dogs barked and chased from yard to yard, trying to keep up with the rolling circus. Neighbors often waved back, probably wondering how many kids were going to survive that ride. Every bump in the road sent kids bouncing like popcorn, squealing with laughter, sometimes smacking elbows or knees against the metal. Dogs often joined the chaos, tongues flapping in the breeze, adding to the circus. Looking back, it was basically a moving lawsuit on wheels, but in the 70s, it felt like pure freedom. Pickup trucks doubled as family vans, amusement rides, and even parade floats whenever kids waved to other cars. Today, it would get parents pulled over instantly, but back then, it was just another weekend adventure. Aurora slot cars were a must-have for every young speedster in the 1960s. The bright colors, snappy bodies, and twisting plastic tracks brought the thrill of racing right into the basement. You'd plug in the controller, slam the trigger, and watch your tiny car whip around the corners like it was chasing the Indy 500. But that thrill came with some unintended side effects. The motors inside those early models ran hot. Too hot. After a few laps, some would overheat and melt the chassis, leaving a smoking puddle where your prized vehicle once sat. Others sparked at random, shooting little arcs of electricity that looked cool, until they scorched your hand. And since the cars were often left plugged in for hours, the plastic casings warped, cracked, or fused with the tracks. Some even caught fire. Parents started noticing the smell first, that sharp, burnt plastic scent that lingered like a warning. Eventually, complaints piled up and multiple models were recalled. But for kids, those slot cars were irresistible. Speed came first, safety came second, or not at all. And if melting race cars weren't shocking enough, just wait until you remember what dads used to do on the roof with a metal rod during a thunderstorm. You would toss it in and forget about it. That was the beauty of the laundry chute. A small hatch built right into the hallway wall or bathroom cabinet, leading straight down into a hamper, or sometimes directly into the basement laundry room. Just open, drop, and go. These vertical passageways were like magic portals for dirty socks and sweaty gym clothes. No more lugging baskets down 2 flights, no more arguments about whose turn it was. You just lifted the flap and let gravity do the work. Kids treated them like secret tunnels. Parents treated them like a godsend. But like many good things, laundry chutes eventually went out of style. Safety concerns popped up, especially with young kids and pets. And then there was the fire risk, as an open shaft could let smoke and flames move between floors. Add in the rise of compact laundry machines on upper levels, and suddenly the chute became obsolete. But admit it, there is still something satisfying about the idea of chucking a shirt through the wall. And speaking of walls, wait until you hear about the windows that were not exactly windows. Imagine a time when the centerpiece of every living room was a bulky, boxy behemoth, the CRT TV. Coming into prominence in the 1950s, this technological marvel turned the humble living room into a bustling family theater. Picture the excitement as families gathered around to watch the moon landing or the latest episode of I Love Lucy. Despite its hefty frame, the CRT TV was the window to the world, until the sleek and slender flat screens of the early 2000s gently nudged it into the annals of history. Yet, ask any vintage video game enthusiast, and they'll wax poetic about the unmatched charm of playing on a CRT. Before streaming in HD, the CRT TV was the family's bond, the newsbringer, and the entertainer, all rolled into one. DIY asbestos home repairs were once a weekend project, not a professional hazard. In the 1980s, homeowners took pride in doing it themselves, scraping tiles, pulling down insulation, cutting through old cement boards with their bare hands and maybe a dust mask, if that. Asbestos was everywhere, in popcorn ceilings, vinyl floor tiles, wall insulation, pipe wrap. It was cheap, durable, and deadly, though few knew how deadly. People inhaled fibers while remodeling bathrooms, sanding attic walls, or tearing out old basements. There were no warning stickers, no hazmat suits. You might remember helping your parents renovate, the air cloudy with dust and the room echoing with the sound of tools. What you could not see were the microscopic particles entering your lungs. Decades later, asbestos exposure was linked to serious illnesses like mesothelioma and lung cancer. Today, it is illegal in many building materials, and removal requires certified professionals and safety protocols. But back then, it was just part of fixing up the house. The risks were invisible, the consequences delayed. And as much as the air inside homes was quietly dangerous, people also put themselves at risk under the sun, slathered in baby oil and chasing the perfect tan. Cabbage Patch Kid frenzy turned toy stores into battlegrounds. These soft-bodied dolls with unique, slightly odd faces were the must-have gift of the 1980s. Each one came with a birth certificate and adoption papers, making it feel like you were bringing home a real baby. But getting your hands on one? That was another story. Parents lined up at dawn. Some camped overnight. Others sprinted through department stores in scenes more suited to action movies than holiday shopping. There were arguments, tears, the occasional tackle, and when someone finally scored a doll, they clutched it like it was made of gold. Kids loved them. They named them, dressed them, and carried them everywhere. Some families had to settle for knockoffs with names like Garden Patch Pals that never quite felt the same. But if you had a real one, you were a legend. Looking back, it seems wild that a doll caused so much chaos. But in that moment, nothing mattered more. Cabbage Patch Kids were not just toys. They were trophies. Proof that your parents had braved the crowds and won. And decades later, those round faces still sit on shelves, quietly remembering the madness they caused. And if you think delivering milk through a wall sounds wild, wait until you hear about the homes that were designed for smoke. Back in the middle of the 20th century, smoking was not just accepted, it was expected, and American homes were ready for it. That is where built-in ashtray stands came in. These were not just ashtrays placed on coffee tables or countertops. No, these were recessed, often permanent fixtures embedded right into walls, armrests, and even lampstands. You could walk into a living room, and there it was, your own little designated smoke spot, classy as could be. Some were ceramic, some were chrome. A few even had lids to keep the ashes tidy. And they were everywhere, in kitchens, in bathrooms, in bedrooms. The ultimate sign of a home that was with it. Even guests had their own designated ashtrays. People took pride in them. Some were decorative, shaped like seashells or horseshoes. Others were sleek and utilitarian, and it was not just adults using them. Teens had their own, often built into the back of desks or vanities. Today, of course, the idea seems almost alien. We cover smoke detectors in foil just to cook without setting them off. But back then, these ashtrays were part of the home's soul. And when the culture shifted, they vanished fast, ripped out, tiled over, or collecting dust as relics of a time no one wants to remember, but no one can forget. But the next room? Oh, that is where the real memories were made. Think beanbags, shag carpet, and absolute chaos. Helmets? What helmets? In the 1970s, kids flew down streets on banana seat bikes, roller skated on cracked sidewalks, and zipped around on skateboards with zero protective gear. Bruised knees and scraped elbows were a daily badge of honor. If you came home without a new scab, people assumed you had not been outside long enough. Some kids even showed off their wounds like trophies, bragging about who had the biggest scrape. A cracked tooth or sprained wrist was brushed off as part of the adventure. Falls were expected, blood was shrugged off, and the solution was usually a garden hose rinse and a Band-Aid. Nobody thought twice about head injuries. If you crashed hard, you just got back up. Helmets existed, but they were for football players, not kids riding bikes around the block. Parents watched from porches, sipping coffee, laughing when kids toppled into bushes. A trip to the emergency room only happened if something was obviously broken. Looking back, it is amazing how many survived without serious injury. But for kids of the 70s, it was just part of the ride. Chemistry sets in the 1960s were less about learning formulas and more about dodging danger with every experiment. These kits came with powders, acids, glass tubes, and, wait for it, alcohol burners. Real ones. You'd light a flame with a match, pour flammable liquids into little dishes, and watch as something fizzed, foamed, or went up in smoke. It was thrilling, chaotic, and completely normal. Instructions were vague at best and safety gear optional at most. Kids could melt plastic, set fire to paper, or accidentally discover the smell of burnt eyebrows. These were sold as educational tools, but really they were training grounds for pyromaniacs. You'd mix mystery powders just to see what color they turned, or if they'd explode. Parents watched from a distance, maybe keeping a glass of water nearby just in case. The burners themselves were tiny metal cups with open flames that danced like tiny bonfires across your kitchen table. One wrong move and suddenly your science project doubled as a fire drill. And if you didn't lose an eyebrow there, you might lose an eye to the next toy on the list, because clackers weren't just noisy, they were downright dangerous. Back in the days when phones had cords and privacy was a privilege, every hallway had a throne, and it was called the gossip bench. This was not just a chair. It was a hybrid masterpiece, a small wooden seat attached to a side table, designed specifically for long, dramatic phone calls. These benches were often placed right by the hallway phone nook, and if you were a teenager in the 1960s or 1970s, this was your favorite spot in the house. You would sit there for hours, twirling the phone cord, whispering about crushes, repeating, "No, you hang up," while your siblings paced in the background waiting for their turn. Some benches had a little drawer for pens and paper. Others had cushions and floral fabric, showing just how serious folks were about comfort during those marathon chats. It was furniture that served one purpose: conversation. But as phones got smaller, and then wireless, and then fit in your pocket, the gossip bench faded away. Today, they are vintage novelties. Back then, they were the nerve center of the household. And while you chatted away about school dances or new neighbors, something else might have been happening overhead. Quietly, from the ceiling, playing your favorite song. Imagine this. It is Sunday morning. You are eating breakfast, and faintly from above your head comes the sweet hum of big band music or the evening news. Max Headroom was supposed to be the future, a computer-generated, sarcastic television host who stuttered stylishly and wore sunglasses at night. He was the face of a dystopian digital world, equal parts cyberpunk icon and artificial intelligence with an attitude. Advertisers loved him, especially soda companies, so someone had the bright idea. Let us give him a full television series. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. The Max Headroom show was visually interesting but narratively confusing. It tried to blend science fiction with satire, wrapped in glitchy editing and background noise. Most of the time, you were not sure if the show was broken or just being artsy. The plotline featured underground hackers, corrupt corporations, and a bleak media landscape, which ironically kind of predicted the internet. And Max, once a futuristic face of advertising, became more of a trivia answer at bar night. Still, his influence stuck around in weird ways. You can spot traces of Max Headroom in everything from video game villains to pop music videos. And if you thought that was sensory overload, wait until we talk about the time theaters tried to make movies smell like real life. Leaving kids alone in the car while shopping was as routine as carrying a grocery list. Parents would crack the windows, hand you a book or a juice box, and lock the doors. Then they would disappear into the store, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes much longer. You sat in the front seat, pressed buttons, turned knobs, maybe climbed into the back. If you were lucky, the radio stayed on. If you were younger, you played pretend. The car smelled like old vinyl and the warmth of the sun. Sometimes it got too hot. Sometimes you cracked the window a little more, but nobody panicked. Nobody called the police. It was a different kind of trust, one born of a culture that saw parked cars as safe spaces and errands as moments of independence. Today, leaving a child alone in a vehicle, even for a moment, is considered dangerous and illegal in many states. Amber Alerts and heartbreaking headlines have changed the law and the conversation. What was once ordinary now feels like neglect. But for kids of the 1980s, it was a chance to wait, watch, and grow up a little. And if sitting alone in a hot car seems reckless today, just wait until you hear what passed for child car safety back then. Because most of us did not even have booster seats. Atari gaming sessions were pixelated magic. You plugged in a cartridge, gripped a joystick, and entered a world made of blinking squares and bleeping sounds. The graphics were basic, the controls were stiff, and yet you were hooked. Pong, Frogger, Space Invaders. Each game was a challenge, a test of reflexes and patience. You played alone, with friends, or against your sibling for hours. The television hummed, the screen flickered. The joystick squeaked under the weight of your determination. Games froze, scores reset. But the fun never stopped. Atari brought the arcade home, turning dens and basements into battlegrounds of bragging rights. There were no saves, no checkpoints, just you and your ability to last longer than your last game. Every win felt epic, every loss felt personal. And if the cartridge did not load, you took it out, blew into it like a sacred ritual, and tried again. Atari gaming was simple, frustrating, and unforgettable. It was not about the graphics, it was about the experience. And for those who held that joystick and battled blinking enemies, those early games are etched in memory. Proof that sometimes a bouncing square was all it took to feel like a hero. Trick-or-treating until midnight with no adults was a rite of passage in the 1970s. Once the sun went down, entire neighborhoods transformed into a candy-collecting free-for-all, and parents barely paid attention. A pillowcase or brown paper bag was your ticket, and you ran wild with your friends, pounding on doors until porch lights flickered off. Kids cut across yards, darted into alleys, and bragged about who scored the most candy bars. Streetlights meant nothing. The game was still on, long after dark. The older kids led the charge, dragging younger siblings along like soldiers in a candy army. Piles of chocolate bars and hard candy were dumped onto bedroom floors at the end of the night, traded like baseball cards. Nobody checked for tampering, and homemade treats were eaten without hesitation. Running out of candy was the only real danger. The freedom of the night made kids feel unstoppable. No costumes with reflective tape, no glow sticks, just kids disappearing into the night with nothing but sugar-fueled energy. Some bags ripped open halfway through the night, spilling candy all over the pavement. But that was part of the adventure. Strangers handed out treats without suspicion, and nobody checked wrappers for safety. Today, parents would never let a 6-year-old roam streets past bedtime, but in the 70s it was just part of the fun. Mercurochrome was the go-to cure-all for scraped knees, elbow bumps, and mystery cuts. Parents swore by it. Kids feared it. That bright reddish-orange liquid came in a glass bottle with a glass applicator wand, and just one dab left a dramatic stain that lasted for days. But here's the kicker. It contained mercury. Yes, mercury, the same heavy metal now known for its toxic effects. Back then, no one seemed too worried. You'd cry over the sting, get that radioactive-looking splotch on your skin, and be sent back outside with a pat on the head. It looked serious. It felt serious. It was practically a badge of honor. But despite the visual drama, the medical risk was invisible and long-lasting. Mercurochrome was banned in several countries over mercury concerns, yet the smell alone could transport you back to childhood panic and Band-Aid negotiations. But if your parents weren't coating your wounds with mercury, They might have been setting you up with something even more explosive, like a fun chemistry set packed with open flames and no supervision. Parents letting toddlers ride on laps while driving was not a rare sight. It was a Sunday drive tradition. Children sat perched on their mom or dad's thighs, hands gripping the steering wheel with wide eyes, feeling like they were driving the whole world. You might remember being guided down an empty street or quiet country road, the adult's hands shadowing yours on the wheel. Everyone smiled, horns honked, people waved. It felt like a moment of bonding, but in truth, it was incredibly dangerous. There were no airbags to worry about, but there also were no restraints. A sudden stop or crash could be fatal. Yet, the risk barely registered. It was seen as playful, educational even. Parents took photos. Kids begged to do it again. Today, such behavior is not only considered unsafe, it is criminal. Allowing an unrestrained child to ride in the front, let alone on your lap, can lead to legal charges. The shift in public awareness and automotive safety has been dramatic. But in the 1980s, steering a car as a toddler was just another snapshot of growing up free. And while cars were full of risk, so too were other freedoms, including the ease of buying a firearm from a stranger, no questions asked. Waterbeds promised the future and delivered waves of regret. On paper, they were perfect, a heated mattress that cradled your body like a floating dream. But in practice, not so much. Every turn sent ripples across the surface. You tried to roll over, and the whole bed sloshed like a bathtub during an earthquake. Getting in without making a tidal wave was a skill. Getting out without sliding to the floor was an Olympic event. They were heavy, hard to move, and leaked at the worst times, usually at 3 in the morning, soaking everything from socks to shag carpet. Still, they were trendy. If someone had a waterbed, it meant they were either incredibly cool or easily convinced by an in-store demo. Some people swore by them. Others swore at them. Pets hated them. Kids loved jumping on them until they learned that waterbeds and sharp objects do not mix. But for a brief, glorious window in the 1980s, having a waterbed meant you had arrived. It was furniture and flex all in one. Looking back, they were impractical, ridiculous, and unforgettable. And somewhere, in a dusty corner of a basement, one is still gently sloshing, waiting for its comeback. Sandwiched in that glamorized smoking without a hint of warning. And just when you thought that was the low point, someone thought it would be funny to actually sell a toy that involved broken glass in a bag. Yes, seriously. The bag of glass toy kit was one of those ideas that sounds like a joke, because it kind of was, but somehow ended up on actual store shelves. Inspired by a sketch from a comedy show, it became a bizarre reality thanks to novelty companies that took the joke way too far. Inside the package? A small clear bag filled with sharp-edged plastic shards that looked, and in some cases felt, a whole lot like real broken glass. Some versions were labeled as safe plastic, but others? Not so much. The idea was that kids could pretend to play with shattered glass as a prank or just for laughs. But what could possibly go wrong, right? Tiny cuts, choking hazards, or just the sheer confusion of teaching kids that handling jagged shards was entertainment. Parents were either horrified or totally unfazed, depending on their sense of humor. The product didn't last long, and while this prank kit was short-lived, plenty of long-term household items were just as risky, like hair dryers with zero insulation and a plug that sparked like a lightning bolt near the sink. So let us talk about telex car phones, the early kind. These were supposed to be the peak of convenience, your own private phone line inside your car. Sounds slick, right? Except using one felt like yelling into a toaster that barely heard you. The equipment alone took up half your trunk, with clunky transceivers and roof antennas that made your car look like a spy van. You would pick up the phone, wait for a signal, and then shout into the handset while everyone in traffic stared at you like you were calling from the moon. Reception? Spotty on the best of days. Dropouts were constant, and unless you were in the middle of a major city, the odds of actually getting through were slim to none. Add to that the price tag, which could run higher than the car itself, and it becomes pretty clear why telex car phones never caught on. Not to mention, you had zero privacy. People in the next lane could hear your entire conversation. It was supposed to be the future, but it felt more like a prank. Still, if we are talking about future flops, nothing tops the brief moment in time where Hertz thought regular folks might fly to work. We just revisited 25 foods that were normal in the 1980s but illegal now, so tell us in the comments which one you secretly miss, hit like if it brought back memories, and subscribe so you never miss another taste of the past.